Hello YouTube. I thought I would debut my postings, posting of videos here with a two-part discussion of sexuality. This video will deal with sex and gender broadly, while the second video will specifically deal with pansexuality, which I will explain then if you aren't really familiar with the term. I'm going to get to identity and gender and boundaries and love. But first, I thought a brief summary of the current discourse on sex and gender and some of my takes on it would be important, so just bear with me through that. So, sex describes a biological condition. One is either male or female. This is controlled by genes and anatomical features. There are problems with this system, namely what would be called hermaphrodites. But that just adds another descriptive category of biology and doesn't really complicate the fact that sex is strictly an anatomical quality, and says very little about the actual sexual character of the individual. This is where the debate about gender comes in, coming from the long history of studies, anthropological studies by Margaret Mead, philosophical studies by Simone de Beauvoir, and so on. This tradition suggests that gender is an expression of socio-sexual structures, or as it's usually put, gender is socially constructed. This really goes one step further than biological sex, which is just an anatomical state. Gender is an expression of society, a function of boundaries and mores imposed by a larger structure. This is the category of male and female, what it means to be one or the other, and the particular symbols and actions attributed to each category. The idea that made this concept of gender so profound was the effects it had on the way people thought about masculinity or femininity. If it was true that gender was socially constructed, then biological sex was not destiny, and people could be of a particular gender based on the way their society constructed notions of masculinity and femininity. But keep in mind that it is a particular structure that's still defining what the individuals are. Unfortunately, because of this, societies do tend to define these categories along biological boundaries, such as in American culture, which really has a strict sense of what it is to be, what masculinity is and what femininity is, or what it is to be a man or a woman. This is where I come to disagree with the notion of gender, because really, rather than biology being destiny, we have social structures of destiny. So you're really just replacing one structure by another. But because societies do differ, many contrary systems of masculinity and femininity do exist. The interesting thing is that even within one culture, these concepts may overlap or be engaged in what I call the paradox of gender. That is, to be masculine is defined simultaneously as one thing and that thing's opposite. Masculinity is to be emotionally sensitive and emotionally stoic. It's to be aggressive and competitive while also being chivalrous and rational. It depends so much on geographic, social, and personal context that it really isn't a category of anything, and just becomes an arbitrary manner in which to define an individual within a social structure and that individual's sexual position. This is why I would suggest that a third category should be added after gender and sex. The category of just the individual, not social or biological structures, just what something defined by the individual. So whereas sex is biological and gender is societal, this third category is strictly defined by an individual. My claim would be that gender does not really exist and should not define an individual just as much as sex should not define an individual. Masculinity and femininity, because they are concepts controlled by what has been called a hegemonic social power, only perpetuate the problems that existed with biological sex. Really that the individual is defined a particular way either by anatomy or context. However, gender in particular creates social boundaries that define anything outside of these boundaries as taboo. Even if these boundaries of masculinity and femininity do not match up with the traditional notions of male and female, they still match up with some system and some boundary. So gender boundaries constrain the expression of an individual's sexuality to fit a social system. And if that system deems your behavior wrong, it does have the power to alienate you. And I know I'm giving a lot of characteristics, human characteristics, anthropomorphizing social structures, but I just see social structures as the result of individual perceptions within that structure. So individuals can, if they have the idea of the social structure and the gendered ideas of the social structure, then they can alienate those who are not within that structure. So I would say that individuals should be allowed to express themselves sexually without these boundaries, based on an important premise that love is love. There should be no fear if a straight man falls in love with another man. He should not worry that there is something wrong, because what could be wrong with love? Love is not gendered, is not sexed, and I don't know how it's become connected with the two notions. It doesn't exist within these boundaries. Love is an emotion and is not really confined like this. Straight, however, is only a boundary defined by social context. Straight is a subjective category and only exists insofar as you believe it exists. And the same goes for a gay man. If a gay man falls in love with a woman, there should be no gender consequence because love is love. This doesn't mean that the man would fall in love with the man or the man would fall in love with the woman, but if they do, there should be no social repercussions. This is what I think it's important to remember after all this. And where I wanted to get to wrap up this video, is essentially that despite these biological and sex and gender structures, really identity is confusing enough without these arbitrary boundaries, namely mostly social boundaries that define who you should love. And that's what I wanted to get from part one. So part two will continue with the theme of social boundaries and love, and with what I think is the solution to this problem, which is pansexuality. And I just wanted to thank you for watching, and if you have any questions or comments, you can feel free to get in touch with me.